Hey, welcome back to Another World Audiobooks. I'm so excited to have you here as we jump into yet another audiobook on this podcast. I need to actually go back and get an accurate count, but this is multiple dozens of audiobooks that we've done on this podcast, and the Saint novel was so much fun. Really enjoyed that. I'm sure we will be visiting Leslie Charteris's work again in the future, but I thought a little change of pace might be in order. So today we are jumping into a new audiobook that you may have heard of before called Around the World in 80 Days. Now, this is a book that I've actually never read before. It's one of those that is a classic, and I just have never gotten around to reading it. So I'm super excited to be jumping into it already, and really enjoying it so far. I think the characters are a lot of fun, and the adventure is going to be a lot of fun. So we are in for a treat. You are in for a treat, and yeah, I'm so excited to be able to jump into this with you guys. So hang around till after the episode. I'm going to actually kind of give you a little background on the book if you're interested in all that sort of thing, and I think that might be interesting. Just kind of get some context for the work. Yeah, I'm so excited about this, and without further ado, why don't we just jump into the very first chapter of Around the World in 80 Days. Around the World in 80 Days. Written by Jules Verne. Narrated by Brady Smith. Chapter 1, in which Phileas Fogg and Passepartout accept each other, the one as master, the other as man. Mr. Phileas Fogg lived in 1872 at No. 7 Savile Row, Burlington Gardens, the house in which Sheridan died in 1814. He was one of the most noticeable members of the Reform Club, though he seemed always to avoid attracting attention. An enigmatical personage about whom little was known, except that he was a polished man of the world. People said that he resembled Byron. At least that his head was Byronic, but he was a bearded, tranquil Byron, who might live on 1,000 years without growing old. Certainly, an Englishman, it was more doubtful whether Phileas Fogg was a Londoner. He was never seen on 'Change, nor at the bank, nor in the counting-rooms of the city. No ships ever came into London docks on which he was the owner. He had no public employment. He had never been entered at any of the Inns of Court, either at the Temple, or Lincoln's Inn, or Gray's Inn, nor had his voice ever resounded in the Court of Chancery, or in the Exchequer, or the Queen's Bench, or the ecclesiastical courts. He certainly was not a manufacturer, nor was he a merchant or a gentleman farmer. His name was strange to the scientific and learned societies, and he never was known to take part in the sage deliberations of the Royal Institution, or the London Institution, the Artisans' Association, or the Institution of Arts and Sciences. He belonged, in fact, to none of the numerous societies which swarm in the English capital, from the Harmonic to that of the Entomologists, founded mainly for the purpose of abolishing pernicious insects. Phileas Fogg was a member of the Reform, and that was all. The way in which he got admission to this exclusive club was simple enough. He was recommended by the Barrings, with whom he had an open credit. His cheques were regularly paid at sight from his account current, which was always flush. Was Phileas Fogg rich? Undoubtedly, but those who knew him best could not imagine how he had made his fortune, and Mr. Fogg was the last person to whom to apply for the information. He was not lavish, nor, on the contrary, avaricious, for whenever he knew that money was needed for a noble, useful, or benevolent purpose, he supplied it quietly, and sometimes anonymously. He was, in short, the least communicative of men. He talked very little, and seemed all the more mysterious for his taciturn manner. His daily habits were quite open to observation, but whatever he did was so exactly the same thing that he had always done before, that the wits of the curious were fairly puzzled. Had he travelled? It was likely, for no one seemed to know the world more familiarly. There was no spot so secluded that he did not appear to have an intimate acquaintance with it. He often corrected, with a few clear words, the 1,000 conjectures advanced by members of the club as to lost and unheard-of travellers, pointing out the true probabilities, and seeming as if gifted with a sort of second sight, so often did events justify his predictions. He must have travelled everywhere, at least in the spirit. It was at least certain that Phileas Fogg had not absented himself from London for many years. Those who were honoured by a better acquaintance with him than the rest declared that nobody could pretend to have ever seen him anywhere else. His sole pastimes were reading the papers and playing whist. He often won at this game, which, as a silent one, harmonized with his nature, but his winnings never went into his purse, being reserved as a fund for his charities. Mr. Fogg played, not to win, but for the sake of playing. The game was in his eyes a contest, a struggle with a difficulty, yet a motionless, unwearying struggle, congenial to his tastes. Phileas Fogg was not known to have either wife or children, which may happen to the most honest people, either relatives or near friends, which is certainly more unusual. He lived alone in his house in Savile Row, whither none penetrated. A single domestic sufficed to serve him. He breakfasted and dined at the club, at hours mathematically fixed, in the same room, at the same table, never taking his meals with other members, much less bringing a guest with him, and went home at exactly midnight, only to retire at once to bed. He never used the cosy chambers which the reform provides for its favoured members. He passed 10 hours out of the 24 in Savile Row, either in sleeping or making his toilet. When he chose to take a walk, it was with a regular step in the entrance hall with its mosaic flooring, or in the circular gallery with its dome supported by 20 red porphyry Ionic columns, and illumined by blue painted windows. When he breakfasted or dined, all the resources of the club, its kitchens and pantries, its buttery and dairy, aided to crowd his table with their most succulent stores. He was served by the gravest waiters, in dress coats, and shoes with swan-skin soles, who proffered the viands in special porcelain, and on the finest linen. Club decanters, of a lost mould, contained his sherry, his port, and his cinnamon-spice claret, while his beverages were refreshingly cooled with ice, brought at great cost from the American lakes. If to live in this style is to be eccentric, it must be confessed that there is something good in eccentricity. The mansion in Savile Row, though not sumptuous, was exceedingly comfortable. The habits of its occupant were such as to demand but little from the sole domestic, but Phileas Fogg required him to be almost superhumanly prompt and regular. On this very 2nd of October he had dismissed James Forster, because that luckless youth had brought him shaving water at 84 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 86, and he was awaiting his successor, who was due at the house between 11 and half-past. Phileas Fogg was seated squarely in his armchair, his feet close together like those of a grenadier on parade, his hands resting on his knees, his body straight, his head erect. He was steadily watching a complicated clock which indicated the hours, the minutes, the seconds, the days, the months, and the years. At exactly 11:30, Mr. Fogg would, according to his daily habit, quit Savile Row and repair to the Reform. A rap at this moment sounded on the door of the cosy apartment where Phileas Fogg was seated, and James Forster, the dismissed servant, appeared. "The new servant," said he. A young man of 30 advanced and bowed. "You are a Frenchman, I believe?" said Phileas Fogg. "And your name is John?" "Jean, if monsieur pleases," replied the newcomer. "Jean Passepartout, a surname which has clung to me because I have a natural aptness for going out of one business into another. I believe I'm honest, monsieur, but to be outspoken, I've had several trades. I've been an itinerant singer, a circus rider, when I used to vault like Leotard, and dance on a rope like Blondin. Then I got to be a professor of gymnastics, so as to make better use of my talents, and then I was a sergeant fireman at Paris, and assisted at many a big fire. But I quitted France 5 years ago, and wishing to taste the sweets of domestic life, took service as a valet here in England. Finding myself out of place, and hearing that Monsieur Phileas Fogg was the most exact and settled gentleman in the United Kingdom, I have come to Monsieur in hopes of living with him a tranquil life, and forgetting even the name of Passepartout." "Passepartout suits me," responded Mr. Fogg. "You are well recommended to me. I hear a good report of you. You know my conditions?"
"Yes, monsieur."
"Good. What time is it?"
22 minutes after 11,
returned Passepartout, drawing an enormous silver watch from the depths of his pocket. "You are too slow," said Mr. Fogg.
"Pardon me, monsieur, it is impossible."
"You are 4 minutes too slow. No matter, it's enough to mention the error. Now, from this moment, 29 minutes after 11 a.m. this Wednesday, 2nd October, you are in my service." Phileas Fogg got up, took his hat in his left hand, put it on his head with an automatic motion, and went off without a word. Passepartout heard the street door shut once. It was his new master going out. He heard it shut again. It was his predecessor, James Forster, departing in his turn. Passepartout remained alone in the house in Savile Row. Chapter 2, in which Passepartout is convinced that he has at last found his ideal.
"Faith,"
muttered Passepartout, somewhat flurried.
"I've seen people at Madame Tussaud's as lively as my new master."
Madame Tussaud's people, let it be said, are of wax, and are much visited in London. Speech is all that is wanting to make them human. During his brief interview with Mr. Fogg, Passepartout had been carefully observing him. He had appeared to be a man about 40 years of age, with fine, handsome features, and a tall, well-shaped figure. His hair and whiskers were light, his forehead compact and unwrinkled, his face rather pale, his teeth magnificent. His countenance possessed in the highest degree what physiognomists call repose in action, a quality of those who act rather than talk. Calm and phlegmatic, with a clear eye, Mr. Fogg seemed a perfect type of that English composure which Angelica Kauffmann has so skilfully represented on canvas. Seen in the various phases of his daily life, he gave the idea of being perfectly well balanced, as exactly regulated as a Leroy chronometer. Phileas Fogg was, indeed, exactitude personified, and this was betrayed even in the expression on his very hands and feet. For in men, as well as in animals, the limbs themselves are expressive of the passions. He was so exact that he was never in a hurry, was always ready, and was economical alike of his steps and his motions. He never took one step too many, and always went to his destination by the shortest cut. He made no superfluous gestures, and was never seen to be moved or agitated. He was the most deliberate person in the world, yet always reached his destination at the exact moment. He lived alone, and, so to speak, outside of every social relation, and as he knew that in this world account must be taken of friction, and that friction retards, he never rubbed against anybody. As for Passepartout, he was a true Parisian of Paris. Since he had abandoned his own country for England, taking service as a valet, he had in vain searched for a master after his own heart. Passepartout was by no means one of those pert dunces depicted by Molière, with a bold gaze and a nose held high in the air. He was an honest fellow, with a pleasant face, lips a trifle protruding, soft-mannered and serviceable, with a good round head, such as one likes to see on the shoulders of a friend. His eyes were blue, his complexion rubicund, his figure almost portly and well-built, his body muscular, and his physical powers fully developed by the exercises of his younger days. His brown hair was somewhat tumbled, for while the ancient sculptors are said to have known 18 methods of arranging Minerva's tresses, Passepartout was familiar with but one of dressing his own. 3 strokes of a large toothed comb completed his toilet. It would be rash to predict how Passepartout's lively nature would agree with Mr. Fogg. It was impossible to tell whether the new servant would turn out as absolutely methodical as his master required. Experience alone could solve the question. Passepartout had been a sort of vagrant in his early years, and now yearned for repose. But so far he had failed to find it, though he had already served in 10 English houses. But he could not take root in any of these. With chagrin he found his masters invariably whimsical and irregular, constantly running about the country or on the lookout for adventure. His last master, the young Lord Longferry, Member of Parliament, after passing his nights in the Haymarket taverns, was too often brought home in the morning on policemen's shoulders. Passepartout, desirous of respecting the gentleman whom he served, ventured a mild remonstrance on such conduct. which, being ill-received, he took his leave. Hearing that Mr. Phileas Fogg was looking for a servant, and that his life was one of unbroken regularity, that he neither travelled nor stayed from home overnight, he felt sure that this would be the place he was after. He presented himself, and was accepted, as has been seen. At 11:30, then, Passepartout found himself alone in the house in Savile Row. He began its inspection without delay, scouring it from cellar to garret. So clean, well-arranged, solemn a mansion pleased him. It seemed to him like a snail's shell, lighted and warmed by gas, which sufficed for both these purposes. When Passepartout reached the second story, he recognized at once the room which he was to inhabit, and he was well satisfied with it. Electric bells and speaking tubes afforded communication with the lower stories, while on the mantel stood an electric clock, precisely like that in Mr. Fogg's bedchamber, both beating the same second at the same instant.
"That's good, that'll do,"
said Passepartout to himself. He suddenly observed, hung over the clock, a card which, upon inspection, proved to be a programme of the daily routine of the house. It comprised all that was required of the servant, from 8 in the morning, exactly at which hour Phileas Fogg rose, till 11:30, when he left the house for the Reform Club. All the details of service, the tea and toast at 23 minutes past 8, the shaving water at 37 minutes past 9, and the toilet at 20 minutes before 10. Everything was regulated and foreseen that was to be done from 11:30 a.m. till midnight, the hour at which the methodical gentleman retired. Mr. Fogg's wardrobe was amply supplied, and in the best taste. Each pair of trousers, coat, and vest bore a number, indicating the time of year and season at which they were in turn to be laid out for wearing, and the same system was applied to the master's shoes. In short, the house in Savile Row, which must have been a very temple of disorder and unrest under the illustrious but dissipated Sheridan, was coziness, comfort, and method idealized. There was no study, nor were there books, which would have been quite useless to Mr. Fogg, for at the Reform 2 libraries, one of general literature and the other of law and politics, were at his service. A moderate-sized safe stood in his bedroom, constructed so as to defy fire as well as burglars, but Passepartout found neither arms nor hunting weapons anywhere. Everything betrayed the most tranquil and peaceable habits. Having scrutinized the house from top to bottom, he rubbed his hands, a broad smile overspread his features, and he said joyfully, "This is just what I wanted. We shall get on together, Mr. Fogg and I. What a domestic and a regular gentleman. A real machine. Well, I don't mind serving a machine." Alright, we are jumping right into it. Like I said, I'm so excited to be able to bring this to you. And don't forget that patrons get these episodes super early. They knew about Around the World in 80 Days before anybody else did, which is really cool. So if you want to become a patron, support the podcast, and help me continue to do this, that would be amazing. And the more patrons we get, the longer episodes we can get as well. So that is a huge perk for everybody as more people sign up to be patrons. So like I mentioned, I want to give you a little bit of background on Around the World in 80 Days. I'm just going to be reading this just so you kind of get the full history and kind of the historical context and some cool facts about the book. Alright, so Jules Verne published Around the World in 80 Days in 1872 as a serialized story in a Parisian newspaper. Excuse me. Which is worth keeping in mind as you listen. It was designed to hook readers week by week, which is why the pacing feels so propulsive and the cliffhangers land so cleanly even 150 years later. That is crazy, 150 years later. Verne had a gift for writing about places he'd mostly never been. He was famously a homebody. Most of his research came from newspapers, maps, encyclopedias, accounts from other travelers, and yet readers in his day accepted him as a kind of armchair authority on the world's geography. There's something almost ironic about the fact that the man who sent Phileas Fogg racing across 4 continents rarely left France. The 80-day premise wasn't invented out of thin air. It was a genuine topic of public discussion in 1872. The recent completion of the American Transcontinental Railroad, combined with improved steamship routes, had made this theoretical circuit of the globe in around 80 days a real conversation among travelers and journalists. Verne essentially took a newspaper debate and turned it into a novel. Fogg is one of the stranger protagonists in popular fiction. He's wealthy, punctual to a near inhuman degree, and almost completely without inner life, at least on the surface. He's less of a character and more of a force of nature dressed in a waistcoat. Part of what makes the book worth is watching the chaos of the actual world grind against his clockwork composure. His manservant, Passepartout, provides most of the warmth and a fair amount of the comedy, and the detective, who we haven't met yet, is going to bring a lot of the undercurrent of genuine tension that keeps it from just being a glorified travelogue. One detail that still surprises readers is the ending hinges on the international dateline in a way that was technically accurate for the 1872, but had never really been dramatized before. Verne understood it well enough to make it the pivotal twist of the entire novel. Something to keep in mind. It was an adventure story, yes, but it's also quietly a meditation on the idea that the world was shrinking, that technology was collapsing distance in ways that people of Verne's generation were still trying to process. That feeling hasn't entirely gone away. It's very interesting to think about just how technology was influencing their lives and how it's influencing our lives today in just a different way. Different types of technology, different impacts, and yeah, it's still happening for sure. So very timely novel, and one that I have enjoyed so far, and I'm looking forward to enjoying the rest of the way with you. So if you have any feedback or thoughts on the book, I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch. anotherworldaudiobooks@gmail.com. I love reading listeners' comments on the air. It just makes this more of a conversation and really makes it enjoyable for me instead of me just talking into a microphone. So thanks guys again for listening. Thank you for sharing the podcast. I totally understand if you can't become a patron, that is totally fine. All that I ask is you share the podcast. Tell somebody that you know about this podcast, and if they would enjoy it, then share it with them, and hopefully we'll get more listeners, more patrons, and allow us to continue to bring you these awesome episodes for free, and hopefully longer episodes too. That is one of my biggest things. I would prefer they be longer as well, so I'm sure that you guys as the listeners would as well. At least I think so. But yeah, let me know. Anyway, get in touch, anotherworldaudiobooks@gmail.com. Don't forget to share the show, and we will catch you next week.